and an honor to be here. I enjoyed meeting so many of you. It's a lot of fun. Everybody has a story. And I have a weekly newspaper column in the Piedmont Post, and I could always find a story. Not just Herb Cain. Well, the violin is a heavenly instrument. It is played by beautiful angels. I guess that's why I was asked to be here. My job is to present the entire history of the violin in 30 minutes. I think we can do it. First, you have to realize, as we've been talking, humanity continues to do the same things. Some intelligent and a lot of foolish things. But if you go back in history, the most primitive people, when we lived in caves, they had music of some kind. And can you think of the first instrument that people used, whether people such as we are or the others who are no longer with us, the Neanderthal? Apparently they were kind of smart, though. Can anybody think of the very first instrument?
The voice.
It would be, well, that's one thing, but the human voice. And if you have kids and you find when they discovered their voices, it was fascinating. I remember my son, all of a sudden, first. What do you think came next? We would have flutes and drums, and so percussion instruments could be used from many things. You could have 2 sticks, various things. And flutes, we could have them made with animal bones, bamboo, natural horns. This is before they came up with metal. Now I'm going to take you back in history, way back. We have to talk about stringed instruments, violins and such. Let's go back 30,000 years, 50,000 years. If you know your history, it was the invention of a weapon which was used for a long time. Boing! Hey, Jim! That's music. The string was probably animal intestine. If you were from China, they would have used silk, things like that. But the string had that boing, and then they said, hey, that's music. And then they take a box to amplify it. Now, that's all that they were. The most primitive instruments were kind of like this. This is from Nepal. My father bought this from a guy, a beggar, and you have strings, just natural strings, that you'd use for any endeavor, nothing fancy, whatever they had. This is a reptile skin and a bridge, simple, and the strings go over that. And then people came up with the idea, a horse's tail on a stick, and that activates it. So you might want to look at this. And this beggar made this. My father saw it in the airport, and he said, I get it for my son, and I've had it ever since. Now, let's see. Always there were natural strings. Wait till you hear my joke at the end. Is interesting because in the old days, instruments did not have waists. You got a high bridge so that the string can clear. But instruments did not have waists. And then the Renaissance, the Italians had an appreciation for women, thus the violin. Now before that, there were string instruments everywhere. China and India, they predated European. I'm an expert on European history, American history, not so much China, but I know they did have it. They also had it in Moorish Spain. The important date, 1492. You know Columbus, but something socially happened then which caused the diffusion. What is that? It was, oh, look up there on the screen. 1492, excluding Columbus. What else happened that year? It was kind of a religious event which kind of put the kibosh on Spain advancing. The Inquisition. And a lot of the brilliant minds were expelled. In Italy, they didn't have violins. And all of a sudden, around 1500, the violin arose like Venus, perfectly formed. And that's the violin. But the Amati family, Amati, do we have any Italians here? Amati is not really an Italian name. Now, how about if I change it a little bit? Amat. Anybody here from Catalonia? It is a Catalonian name. So the Spanish government, to solidify its religious base and political base, started the Inquisition. Lots of people left. The Amat family moved from the Barcelona area to northern Italy. They changed the name. Antonio Amati. It's very Italian. And the birth of the violin, Amati sort of takes credit for it. Anyway, in northern Italy. It emerged fully formed. And of course, everybody knows about Stradivarius. These families continued for hundreds of years, some of them. You know about, the eldest kid becomes a member of the family. But I'm going to show you some things. I brought a few things to show you. Originally, they played the violin not in this position, but they would play it kind of like this, sitting down like that. Sometimes you see country fiddlers doing that. Then they said, it's better up here. There were two holds. There was the high hold and the low hold. And it doesn't mean that high hold this way or down like this, but it would be on the shoulder. And then there was the low hold. You see country fiddlers playing like that. And a lot of country fiddling is music, a style that people played back in the 1700s. That kind of thing. Before. Like that. And it was fascinating also that instruments in the old days, each country had its own way of doing things. And sometimes one city going from one city to another. If you were from northern Italy, you could take a look, the color here, and you know this is the color of varnish that was used in Cremona. That's the city of Stradivarius. If you were from Naples, they used other stuff. The wood was the same, spruce, maple, ebony, and the violin hasn't changed much. The only thing they did, the angle here was changed a little bit, and they did something on the inside that you wouldn't even know. That's it. Aside from that, you could see is in the old days, they didn't play with this. You put the chin directly. Guys had beards and they sweat, and it kind of messed the instrument up. So somebody, a German, said, hey, let's have a fiddle grip to make the instrument easier to hold. He was the guy who also invented the baton. Before that, they had a big staff, and they would beat it on the floor. There was a famous French composer. He was not a very nice guy, and he got mad at the orchestra, beating this, and he missed, and he hit his toe. Got infected, and he died. His musicians were happy. The French government never reinstated that position again. He was so disliked. The unfortunate thing is that he was one of the greatest musicians of all time. At any rate, you can tell, if you know instruments, you can tell where something was made, sometimes by the sound. So you had the Italian school, but there were a lot of different places where they had it. Oh, I forgot to tell you. In Naples, famous for spaghetti, they used spaghetti wrappers to make the black lines around the edge of the instrument. They would dye it black, and you know what they would use? Squid ink. Everything was natural. And to make red varnish, they used dragon's blood. That's what it's called. It's a red gum, always natural. The Germans had a different way of doing things. They didn't have such an appreciation of a women's form, you know, although I'm not going to enter that conversation. But you can tell, until recently, the nationality as the same thing. You could see somebody who's wearing a German suit, the German instrument. You could tell, without even listening, it's German or French. Each country was individual. And I love those differences. Now everything is homogenized. They all look the same. Everybody will make an Italian violin, including the Germans. The bow also, same thing. That's unfortunate. Now, told you about the woods. In the beginning, in Europe, the Catholic Church ruled supreme. Instruments were used to help out the chorus in church. And they played along. Then, I was going to say in the beginning, you know, these days everybody says that's how they did it. There was no similarity. People tuned in different ways, always different. And I love those differences. Now, the beginning was church music. And then there was some real old music. They had back in Mesopotamian days and also in Egypt. And people learned how to read those musical notation. You'd have to investigate. But the oldest songs, there's a Jewish tune called Kol Nidre, played on the Day of Atonement. And that's a very old melody that is still used today. It goes like this. there's another tune that is used even to this day. It is a La Folia, and it was used this way. And then it repeats. And that was used for hundreds of years. Now, church music, you had the musicians playing along with the chorus. No women, no girls. And then an Italian violinist by the name of Corelli became very popular. And he also had a very good sense of humor, this guy. He was self-effacing, a very nice guy, always dressed in black. You thought the man in black, you know, Johnny Cash. Nah, goes back to the late 1500s. And Corelli was the most famous violinist in the world. And he was conducting the music of another famous composer by the name of Handel. And Corelli was having some trouble with the music. He was having real problem. He couldn't play it. And Handel was getting annoyed. And he goes up there and says, "Maestro, may I use your violin and show you how my music should go?" Corelli said, "Please, be my guest." And Handel played, gave the violin back to Corelli, and you know what Corelli said? "I'm sorry, please excuse me, I don't understand this modern music." But Corelli wrote a tune. This music was really not very difficult. Oh, thank you. The next generation, a guy by the name of Tartini came along, and Tartini was an incredible guy. He was a great swordsman. He was a very famous ladies' man, and one of the greatest violinists and theoreticians of all time. And he took that tune by Corelli, and he changed it around to make variations. Now that bowing is very much like you see country fiddling. Very fast, very light in the middle of the bow. How did that happen? You know, anybody from the Appalachian area? There's a place where I'd like to go. Hope I would be accepted, you never know. But they learned 18th century violin technique. They go to these small towns and they are isolated. And so it is a moment caught in history. So look at a country fiddler. And that bowing technique is the way they played in the 1700s. And don't think that they don't have prejudice for the guys who live down the stream. So those guys down the stream talk so slow. But it's interesting to watch. And you know, we had two presidents of the United States who played violin in the early days, excluding Nixon, who liked violin, but Thomas Jefferson and George Washington both had very nice instruments. I know what happened to Jefferson's. It ended up, you know, he had a lady friend, Hemings. Yeah, Sally Hemings. And the descendants of her family had Jefferson's violin. It resurfaced about 1940. I read an article. I don't know what happened to George Washington's violin. He, being a very wealthy man, he had the most expensive make, which was not a Stradivarius, it was a German instrument. All right, so next, Oh, the Red Violin. Did any of you see it? Interesting movie. Do we have any scientists here? You know the story.
It was presented by the San Jose Symphony, which at that time was the
Yeah.
Silver Valley Symphony.
Yeah.
With the movie.
Yes, it's a very interesting story. What time do I need to finish? About 12:30. Okay, I will. If any of you are scientists, you know the story. This man, he's in love with his wife. She dies. He takes her blood and he uses it to make a red violin. Well, let's see. I'm not a scientist, but I know this much. What happens to blood when it oxidizes? It turns brown. Okay, no red violin. What happens when you mix water-based blood and oil-based varnish? You don't need to be a chemist to know you got one mess. So anyway, it's a wonderful story. People fainting and using the violin as a baseball bat, Wonderful story, but not too accurate when it comes. Oh yes, and another thing, that a person could go and try to pull a switcheroo between the world's greatest experts. You can't do that, folks. They will see it in an instant. The experts are so good. To give you an example, this bow was made by one of the great makers. This piece on the end, this little piece of gold, had fallen off. A jeweler friend of mine makes bows. He said, have the gold chemically analyzed. He then had that formula. He cast this piece. He used exactly the same tool to make this as the original. I went to Europe and I brought this bow and I showed it to somebody. Looks like this is how they study bows. Very nice. This is not original. You the alloy, but they know. And these are really great experts. So this violin was made by one of the famous makers, Guarnerius. You have Stradivarius and Guarneri. This guy worked in the same shop as Stradivarius for Amati. And then he had a whole bunch of kids, and they continued for a long time. Stradivarius, he had kids. They couldn't stand him. He was a great maker, but not a nice person. He was very controlling. What else is new? "200 years later, model after the same, a little bit bigger. But if I play for you, if you listen, it's got a darker sound, more masculine. I do the same thing. There's a slight difference. It's interesting. I've had this violin since 1967. I have played it in concert a total of 3 times. All right, let's see now. Keeping to this. Okay, so about the red violin. I got off airplane in Oakland, and as I'm leaving, I don't remember, there was a young woman there. She's got a violin case. Oh, hi, how are you, a violinist? She was the owner of the red violin. Now, the bow, the violin didn't change much, but the bow changed a lot. From originally bowing like that, the bows were curved. And then they got to be advanced like this. The top part of the bow was always very low, and this part here was bigger. And the problem was not because people couldn't solve the problems, but the problem was the gills. If you were a woodworker, you could work in wood, but you were not allowed to use metal. So they did not know how to adjust the tension of the hair. You could be sure they could have solved that problem, but the guild did not let them. Here is a very early bow from about 1750. In order to get tension on the hair, they have some part going back where my fingers are. And that makes this part of the bow very heavy. You're talking about the weight of a candy bar. Half gram makes a tremendous difference, as does where you put this. So let me take it apart and you can see what's going on. The horsehair, and they almost always use horses. This is ivory on the fancy bows. You know, you had a rich customer, jazz it up, put some ivory on, put some gold on, tortoiseshell. All that stuff is illegal now, including they didn't know what to make with the stick. They used all kinds of stuff. The violin was always the same thing, but the bow they didn't know. And then a famous French bow maker went down to the docks and he saw some Pernambuco wood from Brazil. It was used in the French garment industry. Rich red, royal blue. He said, hey, let me try some of that wood to make the bow. And he did. Revolutionized everything. He then came up with the idea to make a downward curve, which enabled this part of the bow to come up and this part of the bow to be reduced in size. Instantly, success. And it caught on, and people started, I tell you, musicians are an incestuous bunch. Things go internationally. And one musician, I tell people, you know, musicians are kind of like dogs. We have friends everywhere. So you see somebody carrying the violin case. Oh, you play the violin. Yeah, and then you become friends. So Guild Pernambuco, oh, the shape of the stick. Prices. Well, musicians for instruments. Nowadays, let me just tell you, in my lifetime, how the prices have changed. A good Stradivarius violin was offered to me back in 1966 or 67 for $25,000. Of course, we didn't have $25,000. It was just an academic thing, and I looked. It was sold for, hello? That violin was sold for less than $20,000. That same violin today would be about 10 million. Wow. Really, 10 million. Things that bows, you know, we're talking something, you know, bow is about like that, like a candy bar. A bow in my youth, $2,000, $1,500, can be as much as $250,000 now. And you wonder, who can afford these? So, as I was saying to some of the people here, you think that payola doesn't exist? Sure it does. What musician can afford that? Very few. And so big corporations will buy an instrument. Sony Corporation of Japan sponsors some people. Other wealthy people buy instruments, give it to associations, and these instruments are loaned out. It does help. As I tell people, Guys, if you want to win the Grand Prix, the Monte Carlo, it helps to have a Ferrari. It does. And the same thing, it helps when you have a good instrument, but sometimes music is the most autobiographical of all of the arts. You can't fool anybody. You can't do things that are alien to you as a person. And so a person plays, you can hear if somebody is impetuous, they're going to play in an impetuous way. And if they're phlegmatic, it's going to be like that. And if you're a dreadful bore, your music is going to be like that. But you can't change conductors. In the old days, conductors could be rather nasty people. They were not very nice. And one of the great conductors of all time, he realized, you know, maybe I'd better change. Instead of being overbearing, he became like the benevolent father figure, and his players responded. You can get somebody to play well by insulting them and browbeating them, but you can also do this, you know. I tell people, you know, of all of the great violin teachers, you know who I put in first place? Vince Lombardi. Vince, yep. Not as a violin teacher, but his principles of how he did things. You know, you can see I study about historical sports. And he was browbeating. He comes in, the Green Bay Packers were terrible. And he comes in there and he's going to turn them around. And he laced into Bart Starr something terrible. And Bart Starr went and he said privately, Coach Lombardi, please, you have embarrassed something terrible in front of my teammates. Please don't do that. And Lombardi never did it again. A superior person. Now, let's see. Just in order to finish, and I can show you some of these things afterwards, you know, about prices. Any questions that you have? Yes?
So in a regular Sarasate symphony, you may have, what, 10 people?
Let's see, full symphony orchestra, you might have, say, 10 or 12 first violins, the same number of second violins. Yes? Well, some people have very expensive instruments. There's a guy who lives not too far from here. I heard him in concert not long ago, and he has a Guarneri. It's a very famous violin, so we're talking of about $10 million.
It brings a $10 million violin.
Sometimes, yeah.
At a symphony?
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, you have to be protective. When I am in public, I'm very careful. As I walk like this, if I go down the stairs, agile as I am or used to be, I hold on to the banister always. And I never leave the instrument where somebody could spill something on it, knock it down. Some people are kind of clumsy, you know. You have to be careful with all your stuff. The same thing when people with the constant hydration, you know, they go into the orchestra rehearsal, they put down the drink and say, somebody's going to knock it over, and that's what happens. But never tell anybody I told you so. Questions? You know, I do not know. I know I can tell you how much my father paid for it because it was about all the money he had in the world was $3,000. It's worth a lot more than that now, but I've reached a stage in my life where My father used to speak a lot of languages, and his philosophy was, in any language, he'd give you what it was in the original language, and then he'd translate. Does anybody speak German? Yes. My father would always say, "Wie viel ist genug?" How much is enough? And it helps. We're talking, there are religious considerations. In Christianity, it's better to give than to receive. But you ask, how much is enough? How much sun is enough? If you get sunburned, you don't do it again. I've had enough to eat. People never ask, how much money is enough? Well, some of us do. And so for me, my son follows in my footsteps. Here, I'm the custodian of it. We're the custodians of these things. This violin was made in 1667. It's going to outlive me. My family had practically not even moved to its the town in the Ukraine. We moved there 1493. It's amazing what word of mouth, you talk about, is it true? My father told me, well, we kind of moved to that town about 1500. I did the research, 1493. Pretty good. So you know about the woods, the bows. Next time you go to the symphony, take a look. They come in different colors, and I'll just show you. So here, this is pretty much one color, a golden brown. You can see the wood goes this way. They have different, you could have one piece. This is two. There's a seam down the middle. There's another person, when he made the instruments, he did it this way. Another one this way. Another guy does it this way. And they are consistent. Like your signature. You cannot fool somebody. No matter how you try, it's going to be your signature. Somebody will know that. Same thing with these people. You can always tell. Try to fool somebody. I had an instrument made by a very good maker. And a German expert came, and I went to see him, and I thought, let's find out how good this guy is. So I showed him the instrument. It was a violin by Guadagnini. So he looks at it. He said to me, very diplomatic, I hope you didn't buy this as a Guadagnini. He knew. You could take a look. Like the guy who take a look over here. Very nice bow. This is not original. And that's how good these people are. But again, as I said, nowadays, everybody makes Italian-style instruments, French-style bows. I liked it better the other way, where you could say, oh, this is German, or it's Dutch. You hear somebody speaking a language. What language is that? Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you play any more?
Oh, well, I'll try.
No, I mean, in an orchestra.
Oh, yes. I did a lot of playing in my life. I made my debut. Well, originally, I used to be a lecturer for the Children's Library in Santa Monica, starting when I was 10. And then I played a lot of concerts throughout the world. And now age creeps up, Even, well, it's kind of hard to avoid. And that age combined with the pandemic. So the last really big concert I played was March of 2 years ago in Barcelona. And I came back and all hell broke loose. A friend of mine died. Then we went to another a concert where a friend was going to play. That was canceled. And then the whole world shut down. So in a nutshell, I'm glad that I'm of the age that I am. If somebody would ask me to play, I'd have to get back in shape. So I've been writing books. It's been fun. Written 5 playing. boy, they're fabulous. Now if I can get somebody to play it and try it out to say that they're actually good. Yes?
In my eyes, those all come the same size.
Oh,
Even for children, are there 3 or more
Yeah.
standard sizes?
the standard size, the body length of a violin is approximately 14 inches. A small violin is 13 3/4 inches or 13 15/16, and a big violin is a 1/4 inch bigger. That's it. It's not like the guy going into a bar and he pulls out a little piano and a little figure of a man, and the bartender said, "What's this?" It's a 9-inch pianist. And 9-inch pianist. The guy said, "What's the story on this?" He said, "Well, I was at the beach and I saw a genie, and the genie said, 'I'll give anything you want.' He said, 'You asked for a 9-inch pianist?' He said, 'Not exactly.'" A viola would start approximately 15-inch body length. The violin is standard size. They come all sizes. So the body length of a viola, 15-inch would be small. And sometimes you get these guys who are really big, 17.5 inches, like this. Sometimes they were so big, they used to play them sitting down. And things have changed but slightly. So a lot of times they would play them this way, like you play a cello. And the difference is, you're guided by that. You have to listen. People need to do that more now than ever before. And it's not just how loud you can play. There was a famous violinist. His name was Misha Elman, famous for his big sound. And they would say, "Elman, you have such a big sound." He said, he talked like a Russian Mickey Mouse. He said, "What big sound? I can play softer than anybody else." The comparison is incredible. You play very softly. I had a friend years ago, and he said, "Oh, the players of today are better than they've ever been." I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what I'll do." My father used to say, "Joe, keep the big bill on the outside. It impresses the girls." So I always use a $100 bill on the outside. I pull out, say, "Joe, I'll give you a $100 bill. You can pick any violinist you want, and if they can play the most simple piece, I'll give you the $100. A bet." Then I said, "No, I'll give you $1,000. I got it up to $100,000. I don't have that money, I said, "I can't lose," because the piece begins this way, if I can do it. What you hear today, everybody plays loud. So instead of this, as the first note, you lose. I take my $100,000, put it back in my pocket. That's a true story, incidentally. He was one of these guys where he collected countries. And you could ask him, "Joe, September 2nd, 1981, where were you?" He could tell you, and tell you everything that he saw. He would scare. He was a school administrator. He'd scare a kid. He'd walk up. Kid causing trouble. "Is your telephone number still 310? Yeah, they scare the kid, Question.
Can you play something short for us?
Yes, if I can. The one thing with things that have changed is I got myasthenia gravis. So the hand shakes a little bit. But let me play a little bit of a ragtime piece. It begins, say that the for is prelude in C sharp minor. The pianist plays that, and I let it sink in. Then the rag. Thank you. Pleasure also. If don't be shy. If you want to play, you can always do it. Now, I just want to leave you with one thing, a little bit of humor, as I kind of intimated at the beginning. The violin is a heavenly instrument. It's a sound box. And the definition of a violin is a wooden box where you draw the horse's tail over the cat's guts. When played well, you think you are in heaven. When played badly, you think you are in...
Thank you so much.
Pleasure to be here, guys.